Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that will make you grateful for modern dentistry. We're diving into the dark, painful, and surprisingly inventive world of medieval dental care, a time when barber-surgeons wielded rusty pliers and tooth-pulling in the town square could turn a simple toothache into a genuine life-or-death ordeal. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video if you enjoy these deep dives into medieval reality. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see our global community settling in for the night with these strange and eye-opening stories. Now dim the lights, maybe adjust your pillow, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1347 with a throbbing molar. The pain shoots through your skull like a red-hot iron, and your jaw has swollen to the size of a small turnip. In the modern world, you'd pop an ibuprofen, maybe schedule a root canal, and be back to normal within a week. But this is medieval Europe, where dental care is less about healing and more about surviving whatever horrific procedure someone is about to perform on your face. Your options are limited and uniformly terrible. You could visit the local barber surgeon, a cheerful fellow who cuts hair in the morning and extracts teeth in the afternoon using the same unwashed tools. Or perhaps you'd prefer the traveling tooth drawer, a carnival performer who promises to remove your tooth so quickly you won't feel a thing. This is, of course, a lie. The third option is to do nothing and pray the pain goes away, which occasionally worked, but more often led to infections that turned your mouth into a pustulating nightmare and your life into a very short, very unpleasant experience. Medieval dental knowledge was a fascinating blend of practical observation, religious superstition, and complete nonsense. The prevailing theory, handed down from ancient Greek and Roman physicians, was that tooth decay was caused by tiny worms boring holes in your teeth. Not bacteria, not sugar, not poor hygiene, worms. Invisible malicious worms that somehow chose to live in your mouth and gnaw away at your molars like tiny dedicated carpenters. This theory was so widely accepted that treatments often focused on removing or killing these imaginary parasites, rather than addressing the actual causes of decay. Physicians would burn herbs and direct the smoke into the patient's mouth, believing the fumes would drive out the worms. Others prescribed concoctions of animal dung, crushed bones, and mysterious powders that did absolutely nothing except make your breath smell like a barnyard. The medieval understanding of oral hygiene was, to put it charitably, rudimentary. Most people cleaned their teeth by rubbing them with a cloth or chewing on a stick, if they cleaned them at all. Toothbrushes didn't exist. Toothpaste was a luxury made from crushed bones or herbs, and dental floss was centuries away from invention. The wealthy might own a toothpick made from silver or bone, an object so precious it was often passed down through generations like a family heirloom. But for the average peasant, dental care meant hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. And the worst in medieval times was always lurking just one infected tooth away. Let's paint a picture of daily oral hygiene in medieval Europe, or rather, the complete absence of it. Most people never brushed their teeth in the way we understand it today. The closest they came was rubbing their teeth with a rough cloth, occasionally dipped in salt if they could afford it, or wine if they were feeling fancy. The wealthy might chew on aromatic herbs like mint or fennel to freshen their breath, but this was more about masking odors than preventing decay. Children learned early that teeth were temporary fixtures in your mouth, not permanent investments to be maintained. By the time most people reached their 20s, they had already lost several teeth to decay, and by middle age, a full set of teeth was about as common as a unicorn sighting. The medieval diet didn't do teeth any favors either. Sugar wasn't widely available, but medieval people found other ways to destroy their dental health. Bread was the cornerstone of every meal, but it wasn't the soft, refined flour bread we know today. Medieval bread was coarse, often containing bits of stone ground off the millstones used to process grain. Chewing this gritty bread wore down teeth like sandpaper, gradually grinding away the enamel until the sensitive inner layers were exposed. Fruits were eaten when available, but they were often preserved in honey, creating a sticky, sweet coating that clung to teeth and fed the bacteria responsible for decay. And then there was ale, the universal medieval beverage consumed by everyone from children to the elderly, because water was often unsafe to drink. Ale was brewed with varying degrees of skill and cleanliness, and while the alcohol killed some harmful bacteria, The residual sugars fed the ones that caused tooth decay. People drank ale for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and every meal in between, essentially bathing their teeth in a sugar solution throughout the day. The nobility had access to imported delicacies like dried fruits, which were essentially candy that stuck to teeth and provided a constant food source for decay-causing bacteria. Wine was considered healthier than ale, but it was acidic enough to erode tooth enamel over time, leaving teeth vulnerable to further damage. What's particularly fascinating about medieval dental problems is how they varied by social class. Peasants, despite their poor diet and lack of dental care, sometimes had better teeth than the nobility. Their bread might have been gritty, but it was also whole grain and relatively low in sugar. They couldn't afford imported sweets or preserved fruits, so their diet, while nutritionally poor, was less harmful to their teeth. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to all the foods that destroy teeth. White bread made from refined flour, sweet wines, imported figs and dates, honey-preserved fruits, and elaborate desserts. The more money you had, the more likely you were to have rotten teeth. It was a peculiar form of reverse social status where a mouth full of black, decaying stumps marked you as a person of means. The tools available for medieval dental care were primitive in the extreme. A barber-surgeon's dental kit might include a pair of pliers originally designed for pulling nails, a few crude knives for cutting gums, and perhaps a file for smoothing rough tooth edges. These instruments were made of iron or crude steel, and they were rarely cleaned between patients. The concept of sterilization didn't exist, so the same tools used to extract one person's infected tooth would be used on the next patient, spreading bacteria and disease from mouth to mouth. Some practitioners used specialized dental keys, curved instruments that could grip a tooth and provide leverage for extraction, but these were still brutally crude compared to modern dental tools. The wealthy could afford slightly better instruments made from precious metals, which were less likely to rust and slightly easier to clean, but the basic technique remained the same. Grab the tooth, pull hard, and hope for the best. Anesthesia, of course, didn't exist. The best pain relief available was alcohol, which served the dual purpose of numbing the patient and sterilizing the instruments, though neither function was performed particularly well. Some practitioners offered herbal concoctions that supposedly reduced pain, but these were largely ineffective and sometimes dangerously toxic. The barber-surgeon was the closest thing medieval Europe had to a dentist, and that should tell you everything you need to know about the state of medieval dental care. These men, and they were almost exclusively men, learned their trade through apprenticeship rather than formal education. They combined haircutting, beard trimming, minor surgery, tooth extraction, and bloodletting into a single profession, because apparently medieval people believed that anyone who could handle a sharp blade near your head was qualified to perform all manner of medical procedures. The barber-surgeon's shop was identified by the iconic barber pole, red and white stripes that originally represented blood and bandages, a cheerful reminder of the violent procedures performed within. These establishments were part salon, part medical clinic, part torture chamber. You might come in for a haircut and leave with several fewer teeth, not necessarily by choice. Barber-surgeons learned tooth extraction through trial and error, practicing on whoever was willing to pay for the service or desperate enough to need it. There were no dental schools, no standardized procedures, no certification processes. A barber-surgeon's skill depended entirely on how many teeth he'd pulled and how many patients had survived the experience. Some developed reputations for gentle, effective extractions, while others were known for their enthusiastic but catastrophically destructive approach to dental care. The typical barber-surgeon's day might begin with shaving a nobleman's beard, continue with setting a broken bone, include pulling 3 rotten teeth from different patients, and end with bleeding someone who believed it would cure their headaches. The same hands that cut hair would reach into mouths to extract teeth, usually without washing in between. Infection was so common it was considered a normal part of the healing process. If your extraction site didn't become inflamed and painful, people worried that something had gone wrong. A little infection was seen as evidence that the body was fighting off evil humors and restoring balance. The working environment was equally horrifying. Barber-surgeon shops were usually small, poorly lit spaces with minimal ventilation. The floors were covered with hair clippings, dried blood, and whatever substances patients had expelled during their treatments. Windows were rare and small, so most procedures were performed by candlelight or oil lamp, creating dramatic shadows and making precision impossible. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, herbal concoctions, and the metallic scent of blood. Instruments were stored in leather cases or wooden boxes, often alongside hair-cutting tools and bloodletting equipment. Training a barber surgeon was a process that would make modern medical students weep with terror. Apprentices, usually boys between the ages of 12 and 16, would begin by sweeping floors and organizing tools. They'd watch their master work, learning through observation rather than instruction. Eventually, they'd be allowed to assist with simple procedures, holding patients down or cleaning instruments. Only after years of apprenticeship would they be trusted to perform tooth extractions on their own. There were no textbooks, no anatomical models, no understanding of infection or proper technique. Everything was learned by watching, practicing, and hoping that the screaming would eventually stop. The apprentice's first solo tooth extraction was often a community event. Friends and neighbors would gather to watch, offering encouragement, advice, and sometimes placing bets on whether the apprentice would successfully remove the tooth or accidentally extract part of the patient's jaw. It was entertainment in an age when entertainment was scarce, and a successful extraction would enhance the apprentice's reputation and bring more customers to the shop. An unsuccessful extraction, on the other hand, might end both the apprentice's career and the patient's life, but such were the risks of medieval dental care. Let's follow a typical medieval tooth extraction from start to finish, because the journey is even more horrifying than the destination. First, the patient would arrive at the barber-surgeon's shop, usually after days or weeks of increasing pain. By the time most people sought professional help, their tooth was severely infected, their face was swollen, and they were desperate enough to submit to whatever torture awaited them. The barber surgeon would examine the tooth, usually by probing it with an unwashed finger or crude instrument, often causing additional pain and spreading the infection deeper into the surrounding tissue. Payment was discussed up front because medieval barber surgeons had learned from experience that patients who survived the procedure were sometimes reluctant to pay afterward. The fee might be paid in coins, goods, or services depending on the patient's circumstances. A peasant might offer a chicken or a sack of grain, while a merchant might pay in silver. The wealthy paid in gold and expected better treatment, though better was a relative term when the basic procedure remained the same regardless of the fee. Once payment was arranged, the patient would be seated on a wooden stool or bench, often in full view of other customers and curious onlookers. Privacy wasn't a concern in medieval medicine, and most people considered a tooth extraction to be a form of public entertainment. The barber surgeon would lay out his instruments with great ceremony, partly to impress the audience and partly to build suspense. The display typically included several pairs of pliers of different sizes, a few knives for cutting gums, and perhaps a small hammer for breaking particularly stubborn teeth into removable pieces. The patient would be given a leather strap to bite down on, ostensibly to prevent them from biting their tongue, but primarily to muffle their screams. Some barber surgeons offered a cup of ale or wine to steady the nerves, but this was more likely to thin the blood and increase bleeding than provide any real pain relief. The patient's head would be braced against the barber surgeon's hip or held steady by an assistant because precision was crucial when you only had one chance to grab and pull the tooth before the patient passed out from pain. The actual extraction began with the barber surgeon gripping the tooth with his chosen instrument. Medieval pliers weren't designed for dental work, so getting a secure grip on a slippery, blood-coated tooth required considerable skill and strength. If the tooth was severely decayed, it might crumble under pressure, leaving fragments embedded in the gum that would have to be dug out with a knife. If the tooth was firmly rooted, the barber surgeon would need to rock it back and forth, gradually loosening it from the surrounding bone while the patient writhed in agony. The pulling itself was a matter of brute force and leverage. The barber surgeon would grip the tooth as firmly as possible and pull straight up, hoping to extract the entire tooth, including the roots. More often, the tooth would break, leaving infected root fragments that would continue to cause pain and infection. Sometimes the pulling was so violent that it fractured the patient's jaw or extracted neighboring teeth along with the target. These were considered acceptable casualties in the pursuit of pain relief, and patients were expected to be grateful for any reduction in their suffering. Bleeding was profuse and expected. Medieval people believed that bleeding helped purge evil humors from the body, so a gushing extraction site was seen as therapeutic rather than alarming. The barber surgeon might pack the wound with cloth soaked in wine or herbal preparations, but there was no understanding of how to properly control bleeding or prevent infection. Patients were sent home with instructions to rinse their mouths with wine or salt water and to return if the pain became unbearable, which it almost always did. The aftermath of a medieval tooth extraction was often worse than the original toothache. Without proper pain relief, patients would suffer through days or weeks of throbbing agony while the extraction site slowly healed, or more commonly became infected. Dry socket, a condition where the blood clot is dislodged and the underlying bone is exposed to air, was a common and excruciating complication. Infection could spread from the extraction site to other parts of the mouth, face, or even into the bloodstream, causing sepsis and death. Many patients developed lockjaw, a condition where the jaw muscles spasm and prevent normal opening and closing of the mouth. This made eating nearly impossible and often led to malnutrition and death. Others suffered permanent nerve damage that left parts of their face numb or caused chronic pain that lasted for years. Some extraction sites never healed properly, leaving open wounds that continuously drained pus and provided a constant source of infection. Medieval tooth extraction was a lottery where the house always won. The best possible outcome was temporary pain relief, followed by weeks of agony and a permanent gap in your mouth. The worst outcome was infection, sepsis, and death. Most patients fell somewhere in between, trading their original toothache for a collection of new and equally unpleasant problems. Yet people continued to seek out barber-surgeons because the alternative, living with severe dental pain, was often worse than the cure. Medieval attempts at pain relief during dental procedures were creative, if largely ineffective. Alcohol was the most common anesthetic, administered in generous quantities to both patient and practitioner. The theory was that enough ale or wine would numb the pain and make the patient more cooperative. In practice, alcohol thinned the blood, increased bleeding, and often made patients more combative rather than more compliant. A drunk patient was just as likely to swing at the barber surgeon as to sit still for the procedure. Herbal remedies were widely used but poorly understood. Practitioners might burn herbs like henbane or mandrake and direct the smoke into the patient's mouth, believing the vapors would numb the area. These plants do contain mild psychoactive compounds, but inhaling smoke from burning herbs was more likely to cause nausea and dizziness than genuine pain relief. Some herbs, like monkshood and hemlock, were dangerously toxic and could cause convulsions or death if used in large quantities. Opium was known in medieval Europe but was extremely expensive and difficult to obtain. Only the wealthiest patients could afford genuine opium preparations, and even then, the quality and potency were unreliable. Much of what was sold as opium was actually a mixture of other herbs with little to no analgesic effect. Patients might pay enormous sums for what they believed was powerful pain relief, only to discover that their expensive remedy was no more effective than drinking wine. Physical restraint was considered a form of pain management. The logic was that if the patient couldn't move, they couldn't increase their pain by struggling. Patients were often tied to chairs or held down by multiple assistants during tooth extractions. This approach treated the symptoms of pain, the struggling and screaming, rather than the pain itself. Barber surgeons became skilled at reading the signs of impending unconsciousness and would time their extractions to coincide with the moment when the patient was about to pass out from agony. Religious intervention was another common approach to pain management. Prayers were offered before, during, and after dental procedures, and patients were encouraged to view their suffering as a form of spiritual purification. Some believed that pain was God's way of testing their faith, and that accepting suffering without complaint would earn them divine favor. Relics, pieces of bone or cloth supposedly from saints, were sometimes placed in the patient's mouth or held against their face during procedures, believed to provide miraculous pain relief. The most effective pain relief was often psychological. Barber surgeons learned to project confidence and authority, convincing patients that the procedure would be quick and the pain temporary. They developed theatrical presentations, displaying their instruments with flourish and describing their techniques in impressive but meaningless terms. A confident practitioner could sometimes convince a patient that they were receiving the finest possible care, even when the actual procedure was crude and painful. Medieval dental tools looked more like instruments of torture than medical equipment, and in many ways, that's exactly what they were. The primary tool for tooth extraction was a simple pair of pliers, usually borrowed from a blacksmith or carpenter and rarely modified for dental use. These pliers were made of crude iron or steel, with rough surfaces that could damage teeth and gums even when used carefully. The jaws of the pliers were often too large or too small for human teeth, requiring the practitioner to improvise grip techniques that were more destructive than effective. Dental keys were specialized instruments that resembled large, curved keys, hence the name. These tools had a claw-like end that could hook around a tooth and a handle that provided leverage for pulling. In theory, dental keys were more precise than pliers, but in practice they often shattered teeth or extracted multiple teeth at once. The claw could slip off the target tooth and grab neighboring teeth, leading to accidental extractions. Some dental keys were so large and unwieldy that using them required the strength of two men, one to hold the patient and another to operate the instrument. Knives were essential tools for cutting gums and removing tooth fragments. Medieval dental knives were typically small, sharp blades attached to wooden or bone handles. These instruments were used to cut through gum tissue, expose tooth roots, and dig out broken tooth fragments. The knives were rarely sharp enough to make clean cuts, so gum surgery often involved more tearing than cutting, creating ragged wounds that healed poorly and scarred badly. Files and rasps were used to smooth rough tooth edges after extractions or to modify the shape of remaining teeth. These tools were borrowed from woodworking or metalworking and were designed to remove material quickly rather than precisely. Using a metal file on tooth enamel was extremely painful and often caused more damage than it prevented. The filing process could take hours and was usually performed without any form of pain relief. Cauterizing irons were heated metal rods used to seal bleeding vessels and destroy infected tissue. The technique involved heating an iron rod in a fire until it glowed red hot, then pressing it against the extraction site or infected gum. The intense heat would sear the tissue, stopping bleeding but also destroying healthy cells and causing additional pain. Cauterization often left permanent scars and could damage underlying bone structure. Some practitioners used primitive drills to remove decayed portions of teeth. These drills were essentially sharp-pointed rods that were rotated by hand to bore holes in tooth enamel. The process was slow, painful, and often ineffective, as the drill bits would become dull quickly and had to be resharpened frequently. Drilling a tooth could take several hours and often weakened the tooth structure so much that it would break apart anyway. Hammers and chisels were employed for breaking apart teeth that couldn't be extracted whole. The chisel would be placed against the tooth and struck with a hammer, hopefully breaking the tooth into smaller pieces that could be removed individually. This technique was extraordinarily violent and often resulted in jaw fractures or damage to surrounding teeth. The vibrations from hammering could cause severe headaches and sometimes permanent hearing damage. The evolution of dental tools was painfully slow, with most innovations consisting of minor modifications to existing instruments rather than revolutionary improvements. A barber-surgeon might file grooves into his pliers to improve grip, or wrap the handles with leather to make them more comfortable to hold. These small improvements were jealously guarded as trade secrets and were often buried with their inventors rather than shared with other practitioners. Medieval dental treatments extended far beyond simple tooth extraction, encompassing a bizarre collection of procedures that ranged from mildly ineffective to spectacularly dangerous. Tooth transplantation was one of the more ambitious treatments attempted by medieval practitioners. The theory was that a healthy tooth from one person could be transplanted into another person's mouth to replace a missing or damaged tooth. The donor was usually a poor person or criminal who would sell their teeth for money, or sometimes a recently deceased person whose teeth were harvested for later use. The transplantation procedure involved extracting a healthy tooth from the donor and immediately inserting it into a prepared socket in the recipient's mouth. The transplanted tooth was held in place with wire or thread until it supposedly grew into its new location. In reality, tooth transplantation never worked. The immune system would reject the foreign tooth, leading to infection and eventual loss of the transplant, along with damage to surrounding tissue. Yet the procedure continued to be attempted well into the 18th century, driven by the desperate desire to replace missing teeth. Tooth whitening was another popular treatment, particularly among the wealthy who considered white teeth a sign of beauty and refinement. Medieval whitening treatments included rubbing teeth with abrasive substances like pumice stone, sand, or crushed brick. These abrasives would remove surface stains but also stripped away tooth enamel, leaving teeth vulnerable to decay and sensitivity. Some practitioners used acid solutions made from vinegar or wine to dissolve stains, but these acids also dissolved healthy tooth structure. Gold tooth replacement was attempted for wealthy patients who could afford the precious metal. The procedure involved extracting the damaged tooth and replacing it with a gold crown or cap. The gold was hammered into shape and fitted over the remaining tooth structure or attached to neighboring teeth with wire. While gold was resistant to decay, the attachment methods were primitive and the crowns frequently fell out. The contrast between gold teeth and natural teeth was so dramatic that many people preferred to live with gaps rather than display obvious dental work. Tooth straightening was occasionally attempted using crude orthodontic techniques. Crooked teeth were considered unsightly, and various methods were used to move them into better alignment. Pressure was applied using wooden wedges, metal wires, or bandages wrapped around the teeth. These treatments were extremely painful and often resulted in tooth loss rather than improved alignment. The forces applied were usually too strong and poorly directed, causing more damage than correction. Gum surgery was performed to treat various infections and diseases that affected the soft tissues of the mouth. Practitioners would cut away infected gum tissue using crude knives, often removing healthy tissue along with diseased areas. The wounds were left to heal naturally, without sutures or proper dressings. Many patients developed severe infections following gum surgery, and some died from sepsis when the infection spread to other parts of the body. Jaw surgery was attempted for fractures and dislocations, though the techniques were primitive and often made the problem worse. Broken jaws were set using wooden splints tied in place with rope or wire. Dislocated jaws were manipulated back into position using brute force, sometimes causing additional damage to the joint. Many patients were left with permanent deformities or inability to open their mouths normally after jaw surgery. Dental prosthetics were created for wealthy patients who wanted to replace missing teeth for cosmetic reasons. These prosthetics were usually carved from animal bone, wood, or ivory and tied to remaining teeth with wire or thread. The artificial teeth looked obviously fake and made eating difficult, but they filled gaps and improved appearance. Most prosthetics were uncomfortable and had to be removed for eating and sleeping, making them more like removable jewelry than functional replacements. The medieval understanding of dental disease was a fascinating mixture of observation, superstition, and complete misconception. The dominant theory, inherited from ancient Greek and Roman physicians, was that tooth decay was caused by tiny worms that lived inside teeth and gnawed holes from the inside out. These toothworms were believed to be actual creatures, similar to the worms found in rotting wood or spoiled food. The theory persisted for over 1,000 years because it provided a simple explanation for a complex problem and seemed to account for the way decay spread from small holes to larger cavities. According to medieval medical texts, toothworms were generated spontaneously from corrupted humors within the body. The four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, were thought to govern all aspects of health and disease. When these humors became imbalanced, they could putrefy and generate worms, which would then migrate to the teeth and begin their destructive work. Different types of humoral imbalance were thought to produce different types of toothworms, each with its own preferred location and method of destruction. Treatments for toothworms focused on killing or expelling the parasites rather than addressing the actual bacterial causes of decay. Practitioners would burn various herbs and direct the smoke into the patient's mouth, believing the acrid fumes would suffocate the worms. Popular fumigation materials included henbane, sulfur, leeks, and onions. The smoke treatments were performed in closed rooms to maximize concentration, often causing patients to choke and gag, while supposedly driving out the invisible parasites. Another approach involved applying poisons directly to the teeth in hopes of killing the worms. Mercury, arsenic, and various plant toxins were mixed into pastes and rubbed onto decayed teeth. These treatments were often more dangerous than the original decay, causing mercury poisoning, tissue necrosis, and sometimes death. The fact that patients sometimes felt temporary pain relief after these treatments was interpreted as evidence that the worms had been successfully killed, when in reality the poisons had simply damaged the nerves. Heat treatments were also popular for eliminating toothworms. Red-hot needles or wires were inserted into cavities to burn out the parasites, a procedure that destroyed what remained of the tooth structure and often caused abscesses. Some practitioners would place burning coals near the mouth or use heated stones pressed against the face, believing the warmth would make the living environment unbearable for the worms and force them to abandon their tooth homes. The worm theory led to elaborate prevention strategies that had little to do with actual oral hygiene. People were advised to avoid foods that were thought to generate worms, including sweet fruits, honey, and certain meats. Conversely, foods with strong odors or bitter tastes were recommended because worms supposedly disliked these flavors. Garlic, onions, and bitter herbs were consumed regularly as worm preventatives, though they had no real effect on tooth decay. Astrological factors were also considered important in toothworm activity. Medieval physicians believed that certain phases of the moon and planetary alignments made conditions more favorable for worm generation. Dental treatments were often scheduled according to astrological calendars, with extractions and other procedures timed to coincide with supposedly favorable celestial conditions. Patients might be told to wait weeks or months for the proper astronomical alignment before seeking treatment. Religious explanations for dental disease coexisted with medical theories. Some clerics taught that tooth decay was divine punishment for sins, particularly the sin of gluttony. Toothaches were seen as God's way of discouraging excessive eating and drinking. This interpretation led to recommendations for prayer, fasting, and religious penance as treatments for dental problems. Pilgrimages to shrines of saints associated with healing were sometimes prescribed instead of or in addition to medical treatment. The persistence of the toothworm theory had serious consequences for the development of dental medicine. As long as practitioners believed decay was caused by parasites, they had little incentive to study the actual mechanisms of tooth destruction or develop effective preventive measures. The focus remained on killing imaginary worms rather than understanding bacterial infection, dietary factors, or proper oral hygiene. This fundamental misunderstanding delayed progress in dental medicine by centuries. Interestingly, some medieval observations were surprisingly accurate despite the flawed theoretical framework. Practitioners noticed that certain foods seemed to worsen tooth decay and that cleaning teeth regularly helped prevent problems. However, these observations were interpreted through the lens of worm theory, preventing the development of a true understanding of dental disease mechanisms. Medieval dental problems varied dramatically between social classes, creating a peculiar inverse relationship between wealth and oral health. Paradoxically, the poor often had better teeth than the rich, not because they received better dental care, but because their diet was less destructive to tooth enamel. Peasants subsisted primarily on coarse bread, vegetables, and occasional meat, foods that were nutritionally poor but relatively harmless to teeth. Their bread was made from whole grains and often contained gritty particles from the grinding stones, which wore down teeth over time but didn't cause the rapid decay associated with refined sugars. The wealthy, on the other hand, had access to all the foods that destroy teeth quickly and thoroughly. White bread made from refined flour, imported sweets, honey-preserved fruits, sweet wines, and elaborate desserts were regular features of noble dining. Sugar, when it became available through trade with the East, was extraordinarily expensive and therefore a luxury reserved for the very rich. The same wealth that bought comfort and security also bought rapid tooth decay and painful dental problems. Merchants and craftsmen occupied a middle ground between peasant simplicity and noble excess. They could afford some luxuries, but not the constant indulgence of the wealthy. Their teeth typically showed moderate decay, worse than peasants, but not as catastrophic as nobles. This middle class also had the financial resources to seek dental treatment more readily than peasants, but they couldn't afford the quality of care available to the nobility. The aristocracy's dental problems were compounded by their lifestyle and medical beliefs. Wealthy people were more likely to consume medicines and tonics that contained sugar or honey, believing these expensive preparations were beneficial to their health. They also followed fashion trends that were harmful to teeth, such as using tooth whitening preparations that stripped away enamel or dental cosmetics that contained lead and other toxic substances. Surprisingly, clergy often had relatively good teeth compared to other educated classes. Monastic life typically involved simple diets, regular fasting, and abstinence from luxury foods. Monks and nuns who followed strict dietary rules often maintained their teeth better than secular nobles who indulged in rich foods. However, clergy who achieved high positions in the church hierarchy and gained access to wealthy living often developed the same dental problems as other privileged classes. Children of different social classes showed the most dramatic differences in dental health. Peasant children, weaned on simple foods and lacking access to sweets, often had healthy teeth until their teenage years. Noble children, fed honey, preserved fruits, and sweet drinks from infancy, frequently developed severe decay before reaching adulthood. The practice of using honey-soaked rags as pacifiers for noble babies was particularly destructive, creating early dental problems that plagued them for life. Professional classes like scribes, lawyers, and physicians occupied an interesting position in the dental health hierarchy. Their work required them to maintain a professional appearance, making missing or rotten teeth a significant disadvantage. They were among the most frequent customers of dental practitioners, not because their teeth were worse than others, but because they had both the means to seek treatment and professional reasons to maintain their appearance. Women's dental health was complicated by pregnancy and medieval beliefs about female physiology. Each pregnancy was thought to cost a woman one tooth, a belief that contained a grain of truth since calcium deficiency during pregnancy could indeed weaken teeth. However, medieval explanations for this phenomenon were entirely wrong, attributing it to the baby stealing the mother's vital essence or the woman's humors becoming corrupted by the process of childbearing. Geographic location also played a significant role in dental health outcomes. People living near coastal areas had access to fish and seaweed, which provided some calcium and other minerals that supported tooth health. Inland populations, particularly those in mountainous regions with poor soil, often suffered from mineral deficiencies that weakened teeth and bones. Areas with natural salt deposits or access to trade routes that brought salt and spices generally had populations with better dental health, partly because salt had mild antibacterial properties and spices often contained compounds that fought tooth decay. The concept of dental hygiene as we understand it simply didn't exist in medieval thinking. The closest equivalent was the idea of maintaining sweetness of breath, which was considered important for social and romantic interactions. However, the methods used to achieve pleasant breath often made dental problems worse. People would chew on aromatic herbs, suck on honey-soaked cloth, or rinse their mouths with sweet wines, all of which fed the bacteria responsible for tooth decay while providing only temporary improvement in breath odor. Tooth cleaning, when it occurred at all, was performed with materials that were often more harmful than helpful. Crushed charcoal was used as an abrasive cleaner, which could remove stains but also scraped away tooth enamel. Salt was considered an excellent cleaning agent and was rubbed directly onto teeth, often with such force that it caused gum damage and tooth sensitivity. Some people used crushed brick or stone as tooth cleaners, believing that the rougher the material, the more effective the cleaning. The wealthy had access to imported tooth cleaning preparations that were expensive, but not necessarily effective. Powdered pearls were considered the ultimate luxury tooth cleaner, believed to impart the whiteness and beauty of pearls to the teeth that they touched. These preparations cost enormous sums and had no real benefit beyond the psychological satisfaction of using something precious and rare. Other expensive tooth cleaners included ground coral, powdered precious stones, and exotic herbs imported from distant lands. Breath freshening was a constant concern, leading to practices that ranged from harmless to dangerous. Chewing on fresh herbs like mint, parsley, or fennel was relatively benign and provided temporary breath improvement. However, other popular breath fresheners included toxic plants like belladonna or preparations containing mercury, lead, or arsenic. The line between medicine and poison was often blurred, with many substances being used simply because they were expensive or difficult to obtain. The development of dental tools and techniques progressed at a glacial pace, partly because there was no systematic way to share knowledge between practitioners. Each barber-surgeon learned through apprenticeship and developed his own methods through trial and error. Innovations were rarely documented or shared, dying with their inventors rather than being passed on to future generations. This meant that the same mistakes were repeated countless times, and effective techniques might be discovered and lost repeatedly. Medieval dental extraction techniques varied wildly depending on the practitioner's experience and imagination. Some barber surgeons favored the direct approach, gripping the tooth with pliers and pulling with maximum force in hopes of removing it quickly before the patient could resist. Others preferred a gradual approach, rocking the tooth back and forth over several minutes to loosen it slowly. Both methods were agonizing, but the slow approach often caused more tissue damage as the prolonged manipulation tore gums and damaged surrounding teeth. The timing of dental extractions was often determined by factors unrelated to medical necessity. Astrological considerations played a major role, with many practitioners refusing to extract teeth during certain phases of the moon or when particular planets were in unfavorable positions. Religious festivals and holy days were also considered inappropriate times for medical procedures, sometimes forcing patients to endure additional weeks of pain while waiting for an astrologically and religiously appropriate extraction date. Payment for dental services created additional complications in an economy where currency was often scarce. Barber-surgeons might accept payment in goods, services, or labor rather than coins. A tooth extraction might be paid for with a chicken, a sack of grain, or a promise to help with harvest work. This bartering system meant that the quality of dental care often depended more on the patient's negotiating skills than their actual medical needs. The social aspects of dental problems were particularly harsh in medieval society. Missing or rotten teeth were visible signs of poverty, age, or moral failing. People with obvious dental problems found it harder to arrange marriages, secure employment, or gain social acceptance. This created pressure to seek treatment even when the available procedures were likely to make the situation worse. Many people preferred to risk death from infection rather than live with the social stigma of bad teeth. Medieval understanding of infection was virtually non-existent, leading to practices that spread disease rather than preventing it. The same instruments used on multiple patients without cleaning, the use of contaminated materials for wound packing, and the belief that pus formation was a sign of healthy healing all contributed to high rates of post-procedure infection. Many patients who survived the initial extraction died days or weeks later from sepsis that could have been prevented with basic sanitation. The role of women in medieval dentistry was complex and often contradictory. While women were generally excluded from formal medical training and couldn't become licensed barber surgeons, they often served as informal dental practitioners in their communities. Midwives and wise women frequently extracted teeth as part of their broader healing practices. These women practitioners sometimes had better success rates than their male counterparts, possibly because they were more gentle in their approach or because they had better knowledge of herbal pain remedies. Folk remedies for dental problems were passed down through generations and varied significantly by region and cultural tradition. Some of these remedies contained elements that were genuinely helpful, such as willow bark, which contains compounds similar to aspirin, or clove oil, which has natural numbing properties. However, most folk remedies were based on sympathetic magic or superstition rather than any understanding of dental disease. Wearing amulets made from certain stones, reciting specific prayers, or performing ritual actions were commonly believed to prevent or cure tooth problems. The psychological impact of dental problems in medieval times extended far beyond physical pain. Chronic toothache could drive people to desperate measures, including suicide, self-mutilation, or dangerous attempts at self-treatment. The combination of constant pain, social stigma, and lack of effective relief created a special form of suffering that was recognized even in medieval literature and religious writings. Toothache was often used as a metaphor for spiritual anguish or divine punishment in medieval texts. Children's dental problems were often ignored until they became severe, partly because baby teeth were considered temporary and not worth treating. However, medieval people didn't understand that untreated dental infections in children could affect their overall health and development. Children with severe dental pain often became malnourished because eating was too painful, leading to stunted growth and weakened immune systems that made them vulnerable to other diseases. The preservation of extracted teeth was sometimes practiced for superstitious rather than medical reasons. Some people believed that keeping their own teeth would ensure they would be reunited with them in the afterlife. Others thought that possession of someone else's teeth could transfer that person's strength or wisdom to the owner. Teeth were sometimes ground into powders and used in magical preparations or worn as amulets to prevent future dental problems. Medieval dental problems were often misdiagnosed as other conditions, leading to inappropriate treatments that made the situation worse. A toothache might be treated as a headache with bloodletting, or dental infection might be diagnosed as possession by evil spirits requiring exorcism. The interconnected nature of head and neck anatomy meant that dental problems could cause symptoms in other areas, confusing medieval practitioners who lacked understanding of anatomical relationships. The evolution of dental extraction techniques was driven more by desperation than innovation. As conventional methods proved inadequate, practitioners experimented with increasingly elaborate and dangerous approaches. Some developed complex mechanical devices for gripping and pulling teeth, while others focused on chemical methods for dissolving or softening teeth before extraction. Most of these innovations were more harmful than helpful, but they demonstrated the persistent human drive to find solutions to dental suffering. Trade and travel played important roles in spreading both dental problems and treatments across medieval Europe. Merchants traveling trade routes often brought new foods that caused dental problems, such as sugar and preserved fruits, but they also carried knowledge of different treatment methods. Pilgrims visiting religious shrines might encounter new dental remedies or practitioners with different techniques. This gradual exchange of information led to slow improvements in some areas, though it also spread harmful practices and superstitions. The relationship between dental health and overall health was poorly understood, but occasionally observed by medieval practitioners. Some noticed that people with severe dental problems often developed other illnesses, but they attributed this to humoral imbalances rather than bacterial infection. The concept that oral health could affect heart disease, digestive problems, or pregnancy outcomes was completely unknown, yet some medieval observations came surprisingly close to modern understanding of these connections. Seasonal variations in dental problems were noticed by medieval practitioners, who observed that certain times of year brought more patients with dental pain. Winter months often saw increases in dental problems, partly because people consumed more preserved foods with higher sugar content, and partly because cold weather made existing dental problems more painful. Spring brought patients who had endured dental pain throughout the winter and were finally seeking treatment when weather permitted travel to practitioners. The training of dental practitioners was entirely informal and often inadequate. Master barber-surgeons might be skilled at haircuts and bloodletting, but complete novices at tooth extraction. Apprentices learned by watching procedures and eventually attempting them on desperate patients willing to serve as practice subjects. There were no standards for competency, no examinations to pass, and no oversight of practitioners once they began working independently. Medieval dental practitioners developed various theories about the best times to extract teeth based on factors that had nothing to do with medical readiness. Some believed extractions should only be performed during certain weather conditions, while others insisted that the patient's emotional state was crucial to success. These theories led to delays in treatment that often made dental problems worse, but they also provided practitioners with explanations for their frequent failures. The social stigma associated with dental problems created a market for cosmetic solutions that were often worse than the original problems. False teeth made from animal bones or carved wood were uncomfortable and ineffective, but allowed people to hide missing teeth in social situations. Tooth coloring preparations promised to hide decay, but often contained toxic substances that caused additional damage. The desire to maintain appearance often trumped medical wisdom in dental treatment decisions. Medieval understanding of tooth development and replacement was extremely limited. People knew that children lost baby teeth and grew adult teeth, but they had no understanding of the timing or mechanisms involved. Some believed that new teeth could be grown at any age through proper treatment, leading to expensive and useless procedures that promised to regenerate lost teeth. Others thought that tooth loss was inevitable with age, and that attempts to prevent it were contrary to divine will. The documentation of dental procedures was rare, partly because most practitioners were illiterate, and partly because dental work was considered a craft rather than a scholarly pursuit. The few written records that survive describe techniques and theories rather than individual cases, making it difficult to understand the actual experiences of dental patients. Most of what we know about medieval dentistry comes from archaeological evidence, artistic depictions, and occasional mentions in literature or legal documents. Regional variations in dental practices reflected local cultural beliefs and available materials. Mediterranean communities had access to different herbs and minerals than northern European populations, leading to different treatment approaches. Islamic regions maintained some knowledge from ancient Greek and Roman sources that had been lost in Christian Europe, creating pockets of relatively advanced dental knowledge that slowly filtered back into European practice through trade and contact. The economic impact of dental problems in medieval society was substantial but difficult to quantify. People with severe dental pain were often unable to work, reducing productivity and family income. The cost of dental treatment could bankrupt a family, particularly if multiple procedures were needed or if complications required additional care. Some communities developed informal insurance systems, where groups of families pooled resources to help members pay for medical care, including dental treatment. Medieval dental problems were often hereditary, not because of genetic factors that were understood at the time, but because of shared environmental conditions and dietary habits within families. Children growing up in households with poor oral hygiene practices and harmful dietary customs were likely to develop similar dental problems as their parents. The cycle of dental disease continued across generations without anyone understanding the underlying causes or how to break the pattern. The relationship between dental pain and mental health was recognized in medieval times, though the explanations were supernatural rather than medical. People with chronic toothache were sometimes thought to be possessed by demons or cursed by enemies. Treatment might involve religious rituals, exorcism, or magical procedures rather than dental care. The psychological impact of constant pain was real, but the understanding of depression and anxiety as medical conditions was centuries in the future. Medieval dental practitioners often specialized in particular types of procedures based on their individual strengths and local demand. Some became known for their skill at extractions, while others focused on cleaning and cosmetic treatments. A few developed reputations for pain management or infection treatment. This informal specialization led to improvements in specific areas, but also meant that comprehensive dental care was virtually impossible to obtain from a single practitioner. The tools and techniques of medieval dentistry influenced other medical practices, and vice versa. Instruments developed for tooth extraction were sometimes adapted for other surgical procedures, while tools designed for general surgery were modified for dental use. The crude understanding of anatomy gained through dental practice contributed to broader medical knowledge, though progress was slow and often accompanied by significant patient suffering. Travel in search of dental treatment was common among those who could afford it, leading to a network of practitioners with regional or international reputations. Some barber-surgeons became famous for their supposed skill and attracted patients from hundreds of miles away. These journeys were often dangerous and expensive, but people were willing to travel great distances in hopes of finding relief from dental pain. Unfortunately, the famous practitioners were often no more skilled than local ones, and patients sometimes died far from home after unsuccessful treatments. The preservation and study of extracted teeth was practically unknown in medieval times, representing a missed opportunity to understand dental disease better. Unlike other medical conditions that might be observed and described, dental problems were literally pulled out and discarded, eliminating the possibility of systematic study. Modern archaeological analysis of medieval teeth has revealed information about diet, disease, and treatment methods that could have revolutionized medieval dental care if practitioners had thought to examine what they were removing. Medieval beliefs about the spiritual significance of teeth added another layer of complexity to dental treatment decisions. Some religious traditions taught that physical suffering was spiritually beneficial and that seeking relief from pain might interfere with divine plans. Others believed that certain teeth had spiritual significance and should not be removed except in extreme circumstances. These beliefs sometimes prevented people from seeking needed treatment or influenced practitioners to refuse certain procedures. The development of dental anesthesia was hampered by medieval understanding of consciousness and pain. Many practitioners believed that pain was necessary for proper healing, and that eliminating it completely would prevent the body from responding appropriately to treatment. Others thought that unconsciousness during medical procedures was dangerous or unnatural. These beliefs, combined with the lack of effective anesthetic agents, meant that pain relief remained primitive even when better options might have been possible. Medieval dental emergencies were handled with whatever resources were immediately available, often resulting in desperate improvisation that made problems worse. A tooth broken in an accident might be extracted with kitchen knives or woodworking tools if a trained practitioner wasn't available. Emergency extractions performed by untrained individuals often caused severe complications, but people in extreme pain were willing to accept enormous risks for any chance of relief. The social dynamics of dental treatment reflected broader medieval attitudes toward class, gender, and authority. Practitioners might refuse to treat certain classes of people or demand different types of payment based on social status. Women practitioners faced additional challenges in gaining acceptance and were often accused of witchcraft if their treatments were unusually successful or if they failed spectacularly. The intersection of medical practice and social hierarchy created barriers to dental care that affected treatment outcomes. Medieval dental problems often became family affairs, with multiple generations suffering from similar conditions and sharing the burden of care and treatment costs. Elderly family members might serve as informal practitioners, passing on their knowledge of pain management and home remedies. children learned early to expect dental problems and to prepare for the suffering that lay ahead. This normalization of dental pain and disease created a fatalistic attitude that discouraged innovation and improvement. The psychological preparation for dental treatment was as important as the physical procedure itself. Patients often spent days or weeks preparing mentally for the ordeal, seeking spiritual counsel, making final arrangements in case they died during treatment, and gathering support from family and friends. The anticipation of pain was often worse than the actual procedure, and some patients changed their minds at the last moment, choosing to live with dental problems rather than face the cure. Medieval dental treatment failures were often attributed to supernatural causes rather than inadequate technique or knowledge. If an extraction went badly, or a patient died from complications, it might be blamed on the patient's sins, evil spirits, or the practitioner's moral failings, rather than medical factors. This tendency to externalize blame prevented practitioners from learning from their mistakes and improving their methods through experience. The integration of dental care with other medical practices was inconsistent and often counterproductive. Some practitioners tried to treat dental problems with general medical approaches like bloodletting or purging, which were inappropriate and sometimes harmful. Others focused exclusively on teeth without considering how dental problems might affect overall health. The lack of systematic medical education meant that practitioners developed idiosyncratic approaches that might work in some cases, but failed in others. Medieval dental fraud was a persistent problem, as desperate patients sought miracle cures and unscrupulous practitioners took advantage of their vulnerability. Fake practitioners might claim special training or secret knowledge while lacking any real skill. Worthless remedies were sold at high prices to people willing to try anything for relief. The lack of regulation or oversight meant that patients had little protection against fraud and often discovered the deception only after wasting money and time on useless treatments. The environmental factors affecting medieval dental health were numerous and often unrecognized. Water quality varied dramatically between regions, with some areas having naturally occurring minerals that strengthened teeth, while others had contaminated water that caused additional health problems. Air pollution from cooking fires and primitive manufacturing processes may have contributed to respiratory problems that affected oral health. Climate and weather patterns influenced diet and lifestyle in ways that had indirect but significant effects on dental disease. Medieval dental problems sometimes became the focus of community attention and support. When prominent community members suffered from severe dental pain, neighbors might contribute money for treatment or provide care during recovery. These community responses reflected both genuine compassion and practical concerns about maintaining social stability. A village leader incapacitated by dental pain could affect the entire community's well-being. The adaptation of dental techniques for special populations was limited, but occasionally innovative. Children required different approaches than adults, and practitioners sometimes developed smaller instruments or gentler techniques for young patients. Elderly patients with fragile bones and tissues presented particular challenges that required modified procedures. However, these adaptations were usually developed through trial and error rather than systematic study of patient needs. Medieval dental records, when they existed at all, were usually limited to financial transactions rather than medical details. Account books might record payments for tooth extraction, but provide no information about techniques used, outcomes achieved, or complications encountered. This lack of systematic record-keeping prevented the accumulation of knowledge that could have improved future treatments and made it difficult for practitioners to track their own success rates. The relationship between dental health and nutrition was partially understood but poorly explained in medieval times. Practitioners noticed that well-fed people often had better teeth than those who were malnourished, but they attributed this to humoral balance rather than nutritional factors. The importance of specific nutrients for tooth development and maintenance was unknown, leading to dietary recommendations that were sometimes helpful by accident but often harmful. Medieval dental innovations were often driven by necessity rather than scientific understanding. Practitioners working in areas with limited resources had to improvise tools and techniques using whatever materials were available. Some of these innovations were genuinely helpful and gradually spread to other regions, while others were dangerous experiments that fortunately remained localized. The lack of systematic communication between practitioners meant that useful innovations spread slowly, while harmful practices sometimes persisted for generations. The legal aspects of medieval dental practice were minimal and inconsistent. There were few regulations governing who could practice dentistry or what procedures they could perform. Patients who were harmed by dental treatment had little legal recourse, and practitioners faced few consequences for incompetence or negligence. This lack of accountability contributed to the persistence of dangerous practices and discouraged innovation and improvement. Medieval understanding of dental anatomy was extremely limited, based more on external observation than systematic study. Practitioners had little knowledge of tooth structure, root systems, or the relationship between teeth and surrounding tissues. This anatomical ignorance led to procedures that were unnecessarily destructive and often failed to address the underlying problems. The prohibition on human dissection in many regions prevented the development of better anatomical knowledge that could have improved dental treatment. The cultural significance of teeth in medieval society extended beyond their functional importance. Teeth were sometimes used in magical rituals, incorporated into amulets, or believed to possess special powers. The loss of teeth was seen as a sign of aging, decay, and approaching death, making dental problems particularly distressing for people who were otherwise healthy. These cultural associations added psychological dimensions to dental treatment that practitioners had to navigate along with the medical aspects. Medieval dental emergencies often occurred at inconvenient times and places, far from qualified practitioners. Travelers, soldiers, and merchants might suffer dental problems while away from home, forcing them to seek treatment from unfamiliar practitioners or attempt self-treatment. These emergency situations often resulted in particularly bad outcomes because decisions had to be made quickly without adequate preparation or resources. The transmission of dental knowledge between cultures and regions was slow and often distorted. Techniques that worked well in one area might be modified or misunderstood when adopted elsewhere, leading to less effective or more dangerous variations. Language barriers and cultural differences made it difficult to share knowledge accurately, and the lack of standardized terminology meant that the same procedure might be described differently by different practitioners. Medieval dental treatment often required significant social support from family and community members. Patients might need assistance traveling to practitioners, help during recovery, and financial support for treatment costs. The social networks that provided this support were crucial for treatment success, but they also meant that people without strong family or community ties were often unable to access dental care when they needed it. The seasonal availability of dental practitioners was another factor that affected treatment timing and outcomes. Some barber-surgeons traveled circuits between towns and villages, appearing in each location only at certain times of year. Patients might have to wait months for a practitioner to return to their area, during which time dental problems often worsened significantly. This scheduling uncertainty forced people to make difficult decisions about whether to travel to distant practitioners or wait for local treatment. Medieval dental pain management extended beyond the treatment itself to include long-term coping strategies for chronic problems. People developed personal rituals and techniques for managing persistent pain, including specific prayers, physical exercises, dietary modifications, and social adaptations. These coping mechanisms were often shared within families and communities, creating informal support networks for people dealing with similar problems. The documentation of medieval dental disasters was rare, but occasionally appeared in chronicles, legal records, or personal accounts. These reports provide glimpses into the worst possible outcomes of medieval dental treatment, including deaths from infection, permanent disfigurement, and catastrophic complications. While these extreme cases were probably not typical, they illustrate the risks that medieval people accepted when seeking dental care. Medieval dental prevention strategies were limited but sometimes surprisingly effective. Some communities developed traditions of specific foods or practices that helped maintain dental health, even though they didn't understand the mechanisms involved. Regular fasting, for example, might reduce tooth decay by limiting sugar exposure, while certain herbal preparations might have antibacterial properties that helped prevent infection. The end-of-life implications of dental problems were significant in medieval times. People with severe dental disease often faced malnutrition because eating became too painful, hastening their decline and death. Dental infections could spread to other parts of the body, causing systemic illness that was often fatal. The combination of pain, infection, and malnutrition made dental problems a common contributing factor in medieval deaths, though they were rarely recognized as the primary cause. And so we reach the end of our journey through the horrifying world of medieval dentistry. From the toothworm theories to the rusty pliers of barber-surgeons, from the agony of extraction to the aftermath of infection, we've explored a time when a simple toothache could become a death sentence. Medieval people faced dental problems with remarkable courage and creativity, developing treatments and coping strategies with the limited knowledge and resources available to them. While their methods seem primitive and often counterproductive to us today, they represented genuine attempts to relieve suffering and improve quality of life. The next time you visit your modern dentist, with their sterilized instruments, effective anesthesia, and scientific understanding of dental disease, perhaps you'll spare a thought for those medieval souls who faced similar problems with nothing but determination and desperation. Their suffering helped pave the way for the advances we enjoy today, and their stories remind us that even the most basic medical care we take for granted represents centuries of human struggle against pain and disease. The regional variations in medieval dental practices across Europe tell a fascinating story of cultural exchange and isolation. In the Islamic regions of Spain, dental knowledge was significantly more advanced than in Northern Europe. Islamic physicians had preserved and expanded upon ancient Greek and Roman texts, developing more sophisticated understanding of dental anatomy and disease. They used opium more effectively for pain relief and had access to superior instruments made by skilled metalworkers. The gradual reconquest of Spain by Christian kingdoms led to a slow transfer of this knowledge northward, though much was lost in translation or rejected due to religious prejudice. French dental practices were heavily influenced by the medical schools of Paris and Montpellier, where some formal instruction in tooth extraction was included in surgical training. French barber-surgeons were among the first to attempt systematic documentation of their techniques, though these early texts were often more theoretical than practical. The French also developed some of the earliest guild regulations governing dental practice, requiring apprenticeships and basic competency tests before practitioners could work independently. German regions showed remarkable innovation in dental toolmaking, particularly in areas with strong metalworking traditions. German blacksmiths developed specialized dental instruments with improved leverage and grip, and some even experimented with early forms of dental keys that provided better mechanical advantage for extractions. However, these improvements in tools weren't matched by advances in technique or understanding of dental disease. English dental practices were notably conservative and resistant to innovation. The guild system was particularly strong in England, and established practitioners actively discouraged new techniques that might threaten their monopoly on dental care. English barber surgeons were also more likely to combine dental work with other medical practices, leading to a more generalized but less specialized approach to dental problems. Italian city-states, particularly those with major universities like Bologna and Padua, became centers for dental innovation and education. Italian practitioners were among the first to attempt systematic study of dental anatomy, and they developed some of the earliest written guides for tooth extraction. The wealth of Italian merchants also created demand for cosmetic dental treatments, leading to experiments with tooth replacement and whitening techniques. Scandinavian dental practices were shaped by harsh climate and limited resources. Practitioners in these regions became skilled at improvising tools and techniques using locally available materials. They also developed unique approaches to pain management based on local plants and traditions. The long winters meant that dental problems often had to be endured for months before treatment was possible, leading to particularly severe cases by the time help arrived. The role of monasteries in preserving and developing dental knowledge was significant, but often overlooked. Monastic libraries maintained copies of ancient medical texts, and monastery infirmaries often served as centers for medical care in rural areas. Some monks became skilled dental practitioners, though their techniques were often limited by religious prohibitions against causing pain or shedding blood. Monastic medicine emphasized prayer and herbal remedies over surgical intervention. The interaction between Christian and Islamic medical traditions created unique hybrid practices in border regions. Spanish Christian kingdoms gradually adopted Islamic dental techniques, while Islamic practitioners in Christian-conquered territories sometimes modified their methods to conform to Christian beliefs. This cultural mixing led to some of the most advanced dental practices in medieval Europe, though the knowledge often remained localized. The impact of the Crusades on dental knowledge was complex and contradictory. Crusaders returning from the Holy Land brought back new medical knowledge and techniques learned from Islamic and Byzantine practitioners. However, they also spread diseases and created demand for battlefield medicine that emphasized speed over precision. The military context of much Crusade-era dentistry led to particularly brutal techniques designed for quick treatment of large numbers of wounded soldiers. Jewish communities maintained their own dental traditions that were often more advanced than Christian practices. Jewish physicians had access to Hebrew translations of Arabic medical texts and were less constrained by Christian religious prohibitions. However, they also faced persecution and restrictions that limited their ability to practice openly or share their knowledge with the broader population. Some of the most skilled dental practitioners in medieval Europe were Jewish physicians working in secret or under special protection from wealthy patrons. The development of dental treatments throughout the medieval period shows a gradual but uneven progression from the early medieval period, roughly 500 to 1000 CE, to the late medieval period, 1300 to 1500 CE. In the earlier centuries, dental care was almost entirely in the hands of folk healers and general practitioners with minimal formal training. However, by the 12th and 13th centuries, the establishment of medical schools in cities like Salerno, Paris, and Bologna began to create a class of more educated practitioners who combined traditional techniques with knowledge preserved from ancient sources. The late medieval period saw the emergence of more specialized dental practitioners, particularly in wealthy urban centers. Some barber-surgeons began to focus primarily on dental work, developing greater skill through concentrated practice. Guild regulations in major cities also began to require basic competency demonstrations, leading to modest improvements in treatment quality. However, these advances were largely confined to urban areas and remained inaccessible to the rural majority of the population. Dental keys, perhaps the most iconic medieval dental instrument, underwent continuous refinement throughout the period. Early versions were essentially modified door keys, but later designs incorporated mechanical principles that provided better leverage and control. Different regions developed their own variations, with some keys designed for specific types of teeth or particular extraction techniques. The most advanced dental keys featured adjustable claws and ergonomic handles that made the extraction process slightly less traumatic for both patient and practitioner. The materials used in dental tool construction varied dramatically based on local resources and metallurgical skills. Iron tools were most common but rust quickly and often broke under stress. Steel tools were superior but expensive and difficult to manufacture with consistent quality. Some wealthy practitioners owned tools made from precious metals like silver or gold, which were easier to clean and didn't corrode, though they were too soft for heavy-duty extractions. Regional specializations in tool-making led to trade in dental instruments across medieval Europe. Cities known for high-quality metalwork became centers for dental tool production, exporting their instruments to practitioners throughout the continent. This trade network helped spread technological improvements and standardize tool designs, though transportation costs meant that only the wealthiest practitioners could afford the best instruments. The decoration and ornamentation of dental tools reflected the status and wealth of their owners. Wealthy practitioners might own elaborately engraved instruments with precious metal inlays, more for display than functional improvement. These decorative tools served as advertisements of the practitioner's skill and success, helping to attract wealthy patients who associated beautiful instruments with superior care. The maintenance and care of dental instruments was a constant challenge in an age without stainless steel or effective cleaning agents. Tools had to be regularly sharpened, oiled to prevent rust, and stored carefully to prevent damage. Many practitioners developed their own recipes for cleaning solutions and rust preventatives, often guarding these formulas as trade secrets. The quality of tool maintenance often determined the difference between successful and failed extractions. The social hierarchy within dental practice extended to the tools themselves. Master practitioners owned the largest and most impressive instruments, while apprentices worked with smaller, simpler tools. The right to use certain types of instruments was sometimes restricted by guild regulations, with advanced tools reserved for senior members. This hierarchy helped maintain the authority structure within the profession, but also limited innovation and knowledge sharing. The documentation of dental procedures in medieval times was sporadic and often inaccurate, but the few surviving accounts provide fascinating glimpses into the reality of medieval dental practice. Court records occasionally mention dental treatments, usually in the context of payment disputes or malpractice accusations. These legal documents reveal the business side of dental practice and the conflicts that arose between practitioners and patients. Chronicle accounts of notable dental treatments often focused on the suffering of prominent individuals rather than the technical details of procedures. When kings or nobles underwent dental treatment, the events were sometimes recorded by court chroniclers, though these accounts were often exaggerated or sanitized depending on whether the treatment was successful or disastrous. Personal letters and diaries, when they survive, provide the most intimate accounts of medieval dental experiences. These documents reveal the fear, pain, and desperation that characterized dental treatment from the patient's perspective. They also show how dental problems affected relationships, career prospects, and daily life in ways that formal medical texts never captured. The economic aspects of medieval dental practice were complex and varied greatly by region and social class. Pricing for dental services was often negotiated individually, with fees depending on the patient's ability to pay, the complexity of the procedure, and the reputation of the practitioner. Wealthy patients might pay several times more than poor ones for identical treatments, subsidizing care for those who couldn't afford full fees. Payment methods reflected the limited monetary economy of medieval times. Barter was common, with patients offering goods, services, or labor in exchange for dental care. A farmer might pay with grain or livestock, a craftsman with manufactured goods, and a laborer with promises of future work. These non-monetary payments created complex relationships between practitioners and patients that extended well beyond the medical encounter. Credit arrangements were sometimes necessary for expensive dental treatments, particularly those requiring multiple visits or complex procedures. Practitioners might accept partial payment up front with the balance due after harvest, when seasonal workers received their wages, or when other debts were collected. These credit relationships created additional risks for practitioners, who had little legal recourse if patients defaulted on their obligations. The insurance concept was unknown in medieval times, but some communities developed informal risk-sharing arrangements for medical expenses. Guild members might contribute to funds that helped pay for medical care when fellow members couldn't afford treatment. Some religious organizations provided charity care for dental problems, though this was often limited to emergency situations. The seasonal nature of agricultural economies affected the timing and affordability of dental treatment. Harvest time brought cash income that made dental care possible, while lean periods between harvests forced people to endure dental pain rather than seek expensive treatment. Practitioners learned to expect busy periods after harvests and quiet times during winter months when money was scarce. The relationship between dental health and social mobility was particularly stark in medieval society. Visible dental problems could prevent advancement in careers that required public interaction, such as trade, law, or religious service. Young people with severe dental deformities found it difficult to arrange marriages, particularly within their own social class or above. The investment in dental treatment was often seen as an investment in future opportunities. The impact of dental problems on religious life was significant, as many religious positions required public speaking, singing, or ceremonial duties that were difficult with missing or painful teeth. Monks and priests with dental problems might be reassigned to duties that required less public interaction, effectively limiting their career advancement within religious hierarchies. Educational opportunities could also be limited by dental problems. Students at medieval universities were expected to participate in oral disputations and public speaking exercises that were difficult for those with severe dental issues. The social stigma of obvious dental problems could prevent talented individuals from pursuing educational opportunities that might have changed their life circumstances. The prevention of dental problems in medieval times was limited by the lack of understanding about disease causation, but some practices were surprisingly effective despite being based on incorrect theories. Regular fasting, practiced for religious reasons, inadvertently reduced sugar exposure and helped prevent tooth decay. The consumption of certain herbs for spiritual or medicinal purposes sometimes provided genuine dental benefits through their antibacterial properties. Dietary restrictions imposed by religious observances sometimes had positive effects on dental health. The prohibition of certain foods during Lent and other fasting periods reduced consumption of items that were harmful to teeth. However, the compensatory feasting that followed these restrictions often negated any benefits gained during the fasting periods. The role of supernatural beliefs in dental prevention led to a wide variety of practices that ranged from harmless to dangerous. Wearing specific amulets or charms was believed to protect against tooth problems, and while these had no medical value, they were at least harmless. Other preventive practices, such as consuming toxic substances believed to strengthen teeth, could cause serious health problems. Regional folk traditions developed unique approaches to dental prevention that reflected local environmental conditions and cultural beliefs. Coastal communities might emphasize foods from the sea that happened to be rich in minerals beneficial for teeth, while inland populations focused on herbal preparations that sometimes contained genuinely helpful compounds. The transmission of preventive knowledge within families and communities was crucial for maintaining what little effective dental care existed. Mothers passed down techniques for managing children's teething problems, and elderly family members shared their hard-won knowledge about managing dental pain and preventing serious complications. The evolution of medieval dental understanding was painfully slow, hampered by religious restrictions on anatomical study, the lack of systematic documentation, and the general medieval tendency to accept traditional authority rather than empirical observation. However, some practitioners did make genuine discoveries through careful observation of their patients and procedures. The gradual accumulation of practical knowledge about what worked and what didn't slowly improved dental outcomes over the centuries, even without theoretical understanding of the underlying mechanisms. Practitioners learned through experience which herbs provided genuine pain relief, which extraction techniques were most likely to succeed, and which complications were most dangerous. The resistance to innovation in medieval dental practice was often driven by economic rather than intellectual factors. Established practitioners had invested years learning their techniques and building their reputations. New methods threatened their competitive advantage and might require expensive retraining or equipment purchases that they couldn't afford. The role of traveling practitioners in spreading dental knowledge was crucial, but often overlooked. Itinerant barber-surgeons carried techniques and tools between regions, slowly disseminating innovations across medieval Europe. However, this knowledge transfer was often incomplete or distorted, leading to regional variations that sometimes made techniques less effective. The impact of warfare on dental practice was significant, as military campaigns created large numbers of patients with traumatic dental injuries that required immediate treatment. Battle surgeons developed rapid techniques for dealing with broken teeth and jaw injuries, though these emergency procedures were often crude and focused on immediate survival rather than long-term dental health. The relationship between dental problems and general health was occasionally observed by medieval practitioners, though they lacked the knowledge to understand the connections. Some noticed that patients with severe dental infections often developed other serious illnesses, but they attributed these connections to humoral imbalances rather than bacterial spread. The psychological impact of dental treatment extended far beyond the immediate procedure. Many patients developed lasting trauma from painful dental experiences, leading them to avoid future treatment even when desperately needed. This avoidance behavior often made dental problems worse and created a cycle of increasing pain and fear that was difficult to break. The social support systems that developed around dental treatment were crucial for patient survival and recovery. Family members and friends provided physical assistance during procedures, emotional support during recovery, and practical help with daily tasks when patients were incapacitated by dental pain or complications. The cultural meaning of dental pain varied between different medieval societies, with some viewing it as divine punishment, others as a test of character, and still others as simply an unfortunate fact of life. These cultural interpretations affected how people sought treatment, endured pain, and supported others who were suffering from dental problems. The legacy of medieval dental practice extended well beyond the medieval period itself. Many of the attitudes, techniques, and social structures that developed during this time persisted into the early modern period and influenced the development of professional dentistry. The slow progress of dental medicine during medieval times helps explain why dental care remained primitive, even as other medical fields began to advance more rapidly. The archaeological evidence for medieval dental problems provides a sobering reminder of the reality behind historical accounts. Skeletal remains from medieval cemeteries show extensive tooth loss, severe wear patterns, and evidence of painful infections that must have made daily life miserable for countless individuals. These physical remains tell stories that no written account could capture. The examination of medieval teeth has revealed information about diet, social status, and treatment methods that supplements and sometimes contradicts written historical sources. Wealthy individuals often show more severe tooth decay than poor ones, confirming that access to luxury foods was actually harmful to dental health. Evidence of crude dental work, including extraction attempts and primitive fillings, provides insight into the reality of medieval dental practice. The comparison between medieval and modern dental health reveals both how far we've come and how much suffering was endured by previous generations. While medieval people faced dental problems that would be easily treatable today, they also showed remarkable resilience and adaptation to chronic pain and disability that modern people might find difficult to imagine. The study of medieval dental practices provides valuable lessons for modern medicine about the importance of evidence-based treatment, proper training, and systematic documentation. The mistakes and suffering of medieval dental patients remind us that good intentions are not enough without proper knowledge and effective techniques. The persistence of some medieval dental beliefs and practices into modern times demonstrates how slowly medical knowledge advances and how difficult it can be to overcome established traditions. Some folk remedies that originated in medieval times continued to be used well into the 20th century, despite being ineffective or harmful. The medieval experience of dental pain and treatment helps us appreciate the remarkable advances in pain management, infection control, and surgical technique that characterize modern dentistry. What would have been a death sentence in medieval times can now be treated safely and effectively in a matter of hours. So as we conclude our journey through the dark corridors of medieval dental care, we're left with a profound appreciation for both human resilience and medical progress. The medieval patient who faced extraction with crude tools and no anesthesia showed a courage that modern patients rarely need to summon. The practitioners who did their best with inadequate knowledge and primitive equipment deserve recognition for their efforts, even when their results were disappointing or disastrous. The transformation from medieval barbarity to modern precision represents one of medicine's greatest triumphs, achieved through centuries of gradual accumulation of knowledge, technological advancement, and systematic improvement in training and technique. Every pain-free dental visit today stands as a monument to the countless individuals who suffered and died so that future generations might enjoy better care. Tonight, as you settle into sleep with all your teeth intact and the knowledge that effective dental care awaits you should you need it, perhaps you'll spare a thought for those medieval souls who faced dental demons with nothing but courage and desperation. Their screams have long since faded into silence, but their suffering helped light the path toward the dental miracles we now take for granted. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free from the terror of the toothworm and the agony of the medieval extraction chair.